In 1993, director Fred Walton got to make a sequel to his 1979 film When a Stranger Calls, a film I have reviewed on my channel. The sequel was made for TV, which usually kind of isn't the sign of quality. It doesn't suggest that something's going to be particularly outstanding. You know, I think of films like The Omen 4 when you tell me that there's been a direct to TV sequel, but also, you know, Psycho 4, which I think is actually a pretty good example of a, you know, straight to TV sequel to a franchise, so they can be good. I thought the first film was a bit of a mixed bag. It was essentially a short film that was then stretched out into a feature, and it kind of showed, because the opening 20 minutes of the first film, the original, was really good, really tense, and then it just goes into this weird meandering thing about a killer, only to go back to essentially the short film bit right at the end. And it's a bit of a mixed bag, is that original film, although it does have its standout moments. So I was intrigued to see what this sequel would be like. I wasn't expecting it to be particularly great, because, like I say, made for TV. As it turns out, it's better than the original. That's just me personally. I think this is a better film. Now, it kind of starts off a little bit like the original, in which we have this babysitter in a house, and it's almost like Fred Walton's like, well, we've got to do that because that's what the film is, you know, the original film is famous for. It's a babysitter in a house, she's watching these kids, and then somebody starts calling her, and yeah, it becomes a little bit unsettling. So just like the first film, we have that, and I feel like that the opening 20 minutes of this ain't quite as effective as the opening 20 minutes of the original, although it is still creepy. It still has an ability to kind of get under your skin and think, oh, okay, what's going on here? Now, that follows a different character to the original film. The original film was kind of, well, the beginning of it anyway, and the ending of it, we're following this character of Jill Johnson, played by Carol Kane. Now, she comes back here after the opening sequence. She comes back into it as the main character, and like since the events of the first film, she's started working for a women's crisis centre, which makes sense given what she went through. And it's when it's after the opening scene she becomes involved in this case. She's the only one who's willing to listen to the woman who was basically creeped upon in this house. It becomes a very interesting film from then on out, because it's really all about trauma and these two women dealing with the same trauma. You know, they've both experienced a very similar kind of trauma, something that the men in their world do not understand, because they will never go through that kind of trauma, because it's geared around the very fact that physically stronger men are preying on these young, less physically strong women. So it's a very specific kind of fear that is born out of their experience, and the film kind of explores that. And I really like Carol Kane anyway as an actress. Every time I see her, she's there's something about her that can be quite quirky. I think that's because of her stature, her size, and it's that comes in here, where, you know, she's a very small woman, and yet she's learning self-defense. She's learned self-defense, and she's teaching it to other women. But there's something about her inner strength, given she's so small. She's this pint-sized woman with a very squeaky voice that, you know, could give you the false impression that she's very timid and whatnot. And she kind of betrays all that through her actions by being quite a strong character, someone who's learnt to take care of herself, and someone who's not willing to lay down anymore. You know, she's willing to put up a fight, and she's willing to teach other women how to also fight back. And that's essentially the movie. You know, in effect, it's T2. You know, if the first film was her going through this trauma and just barely getting through it with her head above water, the second film is her having got to grips with that trauma and using it to, like I say, go all Sarah Connor on the killer's ass, so to speak. We also see the return of Charles Durning's character, John Clifford, from the first film. He was the police detective that was helping Carol Kane's character. He was the one that kind of believed her and supported her, and was a good, strong male character in that film. I think if it was made today, he probably wouldn't even be there, or if he was, they'd make him a bit of an asshat, you know. But yeah, it's nice to see him come back, and I like the relationship between her and Jill Johnson, between him, I should say, and Jill Johnson, just the way they trust each other, look out for each other. I like seeing him doing the investigative work alongside her doing the, you know, the counselling essentially of this other woman, as they both attempt to work this case and discover who it is who's doing this. There are some questions raised throughout the film with regards to, you know, who is doing this. Is it just one guy? Is it two? Given what happens at the beginning of the film, it feels a little bit like this couldn't have just been one guy, even though she says that no, there was definitely only one guy there. And it's like, and that's the mystery. I like that mystery. The resolution to that mystery is interesting. It goes to what some might say is a bit of a wacky place, but it does make for a creepy ending. The ending to this is quite creepy. Once you see what the killer or killers are doing in this environment that they've kind of taken control of in the final scenes, it's something a little bit off kilter about it that adds to the creep factor. Now, obviously, because this was a made-for-TV movie in the 90s, it wasn't shot in widescreen, or certainly the presentation isn't in widescreen. That for me is a bit of a downside. It's, you know, it's always feels more cinematic when you're watching a film and it's widescreen ratio. But here, having to watch it in the old box style, that was my biggest downside really about this film. But on the whole, I definitely think it is a much better movie than the first one, and that is because it's more consistent. It's more focused. Because we stay with this character, because we stay with Jill Johnson. You know, once we get past the opening scene, Jill Johnson comes into it, and she has a good reason for being there. You know what I mean? It doesn't feel disconnected. It all feels like it's one story, not just multiple stories that have been shoehorned together. So because of that, I just feel like as a narrative, it works a lot better. And because of the history that we have with this character, Jill Johnson, that feeds into the story and just makes it much more gripping, I would say, than the first film. Ideally, I think what would be best is if you edited out the opening 20 minutes from the first film along with the last 10-15 minutes, put them on the beginning of this, and just make it one long feature film. I think that would work brilliantly. So yeah, When a Stranger Calls Back. That was a nice surprise for me, I've got to say. But my question to you is, have you seen it? And if so, how do you think it compares to the original? Which one do you prefer? And also, are there any more made-for-TV, direct-to-TV sequels out there to horror movies that are really worth checking out? Maybe ones I've missed. If so, let me know about them down in the comments section. Thank you for watching this review, and until next time, cracking.